Hi, Helen. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. It looks like I can hear
Can you hear me now?
you. Yes, now I can.
Yeah, okay. We were talking about, see my beta shirt?
I saw
Everyone
that.
got them. I mean,
I
all
heard.
the employees had them on.
Oh, no kidding.
So I said to Kyle, is this, or one of the employees, do you guys like wear these all the time? Or is it just for this? And they said, no, some of us do because they're flame retardant. But we all got them for this event. And they all had them on, pretty much. It was really cool. And you probably have, I don't know what that is. That must be for you. Kyle was very good. He's an excellent speaker. So,
Yeah, he really is.
and he had, great little starting things, as he introduced each of the speakers. So it was cute. He'd done his homework. Or had
Good.
some real life
Yeah, sure.
things. Oh, here it is. Oh, well. Anyway.
Steve, I can hear you, but I can't see you. You know you have to.
I will be up there in just a moment. I was just trying to not look awkward and be sitting in my seat, the only person who just with.
So you want me to?
When I was in here alone. Sorry, Travis. You were back there.
Well, when I got to the hangar this morning, or not the hangar, but the production place, there was nobody else besides beta people there. I was early, but they made it a big deal not to be late.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Of course, the other
but
the other ones come in on two wheels.
the governor was late, and Leahy wasn't. I think Welch was a little bit, or maybe Bernie or something. But it was fun to see all my little old friends again.
You had mail.
Oh dear, yeah. Kevin Strauss. But anyway. Oh, and I gave a little plug to Brian. 2 days every, the 3 weeks before Thanksgiving.
Good.
Like I think it was a Tuesday and a Wednesday, or a Wednesday and a Thursday. So
Good.
we just have to get that scheduled. 1 minute, counting. Oh, it was funny at the meeting this morning. I met this young girl, and I said, "Oh, so what's your job here?" And she said, and this other gal was saying, "This will be interesting." And she said, "Well, I just kind of hang out and do homework." And I said, "Oh, you're one of the daughters." She was so cute, but she didn't look. I said, "What grade are you in?" And she was in 8th grade, and I thought, no, Ruby is 10. That was her birthday.
Yeah.
This was her older sister, Charlotte.
I should have sung happy birthday.
Ruby plays soccer.
Oh, yeah. So it was just sort of funny. I thought she was an employee.
And there's another older dog, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Pilot.
Yeah. Well, so I met the oldest one in a small group of beta employees. I was talking because I knew one of the employees. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And at the last minute, I go, "Well, this is Kyle's other daughter."
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was so funny. Okay, it's the bewitching hour, so I would like to call to order the South Burlington City Council meeting of Monday, October 2nd, 2023. And our first item is to pledge to the flag. And Tyler, do you want to do that for us? Start it?
Sure.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, the second item, instructions on exiting the building.
I think Jesse's words are, there's 2 exits in the rear of the building, and then you can go right or left from there.
Okay.
And if we're not monitoring the chat, but if you will want to speak, we will turn your camera on. We'll acknowledge that.
Okay. Agenda review, item 3. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in order of agenda items? Okay, seeing none. Comments and questions from the public not related to the agenda. Larry, are you here to make a comment, or are you just here? Oh, okay. Chris, you are. Okay. Pardon me? Yes, it is.
Wow.
It is the
Talk about
time.
nailing timing here. Thank you, City Council. Chris Trombley, Chair of the Affordable Housing Committee. I'm here in my chair role today. I just wanted to give a heads up to the City Council that the Affordable Housing Committee met in our September meeting, and an item that we discussed was exploring options to expand the scope of the Housing Trust Fund. So we established a work group identifying funding, who's been tasked with identifying funding strategies, pros and cons of each, and presenting to the Affordable Housing Committee at the next meeting for possible action. So with budget season aware, we wanted to give a heads up to the City Council this evening. And next steps is we've engaged Larry from the Housing Trust Fund to be a member of that work group, so that is a collaborative effort when we make that recommendation at the October 18th meeting. I understand the council may meet before on the 16th, and so we may be back to provide an update at that time.
Okay,
That is
Good.
it. Very good. Thank you so
great.
much.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Larry, for expanding you have an ever expanding role in this city, don't you? That's great. Okay, are there any other comments from the public not related to the agenda? Please come up front, state your name and your topic, and make sure that the mic,
conference
the
will
light
now be
is
recorded.
very green.
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Diane Sandy, 50 Bartlett Bay Road, and we are here regarding the short-term rental issue that we've been talked about before, and we've trust you received the letter that we sent with, we had about probably 30 signatures of residents and 15 properties in the Bartlett Bay, also Stanhope Road and Austin Road. And, our concerns continue. We look ahead to May, and we've already booked 2 graduations at least the property next to ours, which is a 60-foot wide property on the lake. So we are like right on top of each other. And we're just wondering where the city council is at with looking at the new drafts for the short-term rentals, and we remain concerned, and we wondered when we might get a look at the second draft, which I understand was going to be forthcoming, but we've not heard anything, and wondered if there's anything we could do as neighbors to help. So.
Okay, great. Steve?
I'll take that one. So we are currently updating the draft ordinance after the last council meeting and plan to bring that back early November for council consideration based on some of the feedback that was provided to the councilors at the previous meeting.
Is that the first meeting in November, you think?
I think it's the first meeting.
Yes.
Yes, I'm getting a heads up. Yes,
Okay,
it is.
great.
Okay. Is it at all possible to see that draft before it comes to you, or?
It will be public like the Friday before the council meeting.
Okay. Good to know.
Thank you. And
Okay.
we would welcome your comments or observations
Okay.
when we discuss it.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments from the public? All right, then we'll move on to counselors' announcements and reports on committee assignments, and then the city manager's report. So who would like to begin? Tyler, do you have anything to report?
I don't have anything notable to report
Okay.
for this week's meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Just wanted to share some feedback that I hope we can address when we next talk about the charge that we gave the charter committee and how we might focus what they received as feedback into some kind of addendum to that charge. And I think that they would appreciate something in return. So I just want to share that. I also sat in on the Affordable Housing Committee meeting, and I can just confirm that was a topic on the agenda that they didn't have a lot of time to talk about, which was expanding the scope of the Housing Trust Fund. And they will be meeting, I believe, with counselors, so I encourage everybody to talk with them. I think it's very interesting. I find that their approach is something that brings together a lot of our goals in the city and goals that we've discussed with other stakeholders, bringing workforce housing, but for farm workers, and how we can develop a goal that we had articulated on the council, which was to invest in some kind of, program where we can have the Green Mountain Habitat develop housing that then they would put on, they would sell, and that they could use those funds, recuperate those funds, and keep going, right? And so getting that into motion with regard to farm worker housing, I find that to be a really exciting initiative that they would like us to address in this year's budget. So I encourage you all to talk with them about it. Just wanted to thank everybody on the Energy Committee, Lou Brzee, Ilana Blanchard, and all the speakers who presented at the Energy Festival. I thought it was fabulous, and there were also volunteers there, and it was a beautiful day, great attendance, and as I was telling everybody, we have our new heat pump. So we are moving into the direction that we all need to be moving in rather quickly. And many of the presentations talked about the assistance that's available out there, including the CVOEO, talked about assistance that is out there for homeowners who aren't necessarily of the means to act quickly. And so I really, really hope that we can get that information out there and make it accessible to homeowners. This is really, really critical for us to act quickly. So,
Great, thank you. Tim?
Just a couple things. I attended the town fair last week in both morning sessions. This is my first time going. It wasn't too far away. The DoubleTree's actually just pretty close by, not Killington. And it was fabulous. I'd never been before and really enjoyed my time there. Met a lot of people. I met people from the Montpelier City Hall, Barry City Hall, talked about their flooding problem. I joined a roundtable discussion about short-term rentals. And it was very hard to hear in there. It was part of the feedback I gave to VLCT was that they shouldn't have the round tables so close together in one ballroom. But there was some good discussion that happened there. Unfortunately, it was pretty short. I also attended a session that was moderated by our ex-chief Trevor Whipple from the police department, right?
wow.
And it was about mental health challenges in the police. And they had 3 people on their panel discussion. I think it was the commander from the Rutland Police and an EMT person, I didn't catch their name, and I think the head of outreach from Howard Center. So it was very interesting to hear about problems that the first responders have in conjunction with, the jails and intoxication versus addiction versus mental health challenges and what the law says about how you deal with each of those and how sometimes the services can't be put together at the same time until a person detoxes, but, So that was very, eye-opening for me. I didn't win any raffles. I didn't gamble any at the gambling night that night, and the food was great at the DoubleTree, and I thank the DoubleTree for their hospitality. It was really good, and there were like hundreds of vendors there. And unfortunately, I walked up to the table that said Beta, and I said, "Oh, Beta's here!" And it wasn't Beta; it was the company that has, sensors that analyze your streets and then produces maps for you to tell you what quality your streets are and which ones need paving. And I went, "Oh, you're a different."
they didn't
You knew
patent
exactly
their
what
name.
I approached him. You knew exactly what was going on. So, I also attended the Energy Fair and gave Champ a big hug. Unfortunately, I also gave Rally a big hug the next day at the UMass Lowell UVM women's soccer team. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell Champ. It's not serious with Rally, but it was just an afternoon fling. So it was great. The Energy Fair, lots of great displays. I brought my e-bike. There were a lot of EVs, and so I really praise the organization for that went into it, right, and the effort, and all the volunteers and the energy committee, and so I had a good time, and then on my way back, I trimmed every tree on Dorset Street on that east side above my head. So no more trees are hitting people, walking or riding their bikes that
You
whole
seriously
distance.
trimmed them?
Yeah, I trimmed every single one of them, right. And Donna Lieben can testify to that. So, and then today I was at the Beta Grand opening with Helen, and that new facility, of course, it's spotless and shining and not complete yet, but it's pretty close to complete. And you can still see contractors up on the 3rd floor running around on those scissor vehicles, doing stuff. But that's a heck of a workforce that's really tuned into their mission, what their goal is, what their moral responsibility is in accordance with that goal, and the way they've organized themselves, through Kyle's leadership it's really great. And so I wish them all the best. And I didn't get to see the flyby because I had to leave, but yeah.
That's cool.
So anyway, I have some great pictures of that if anybody wants to see them later. So, but you'll probably see them on the news and in the paper, and so that's all I have. Other than the fact that UVM beat UMass by 6-1. Sorry, UMass Lowell. It was a good game, beautiful day at Virtue Field. I urge everybody to try and get out and see at least one UVM soccer game, men or women, before the season's over. It's already October.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yes. So I met with the Burlington Transportation, Energy, and Utility Committee. They invited me to speak about what we're doing here in South Burlington, particularly the commercial solar ready and commercial PV they were interested in. And so I shared that, and then we kind of went back and forth, listened to things they're doing. They were also curious about our kind of solar siting where we require kind of roads and lots and buildings to be aligned to maximize PV and our stretch code. So it was a really, really good discussion. I thank them for everything that they did that we slavishly copied. And we agreed to continue this really good partnership and dialogue. So that was great. On a process note, it was interesting that on that committee were 3 of their counselors, and which I think, made it possible for them to maybe do things more quickly and with more impact. So that was interesting.
What town was this?
Burlington.
Burlington.
Yeah.
3 is not a quorum there.
That's
Right,
right.
exactly. Yes, yeah.
Not even close.
Well, but we could have 2 potentially. It was interesting.
It's
The process.
a minor political party.
Process was interesting. I met with our new school board chair, Kate Bailey. The school is forming a climate action committee to help the school implement their piece of our climate action plan. They're going to focus on operations, their infrastructure, their transportation, and their curriculum. They invited me to join that, which I willingly accepted. They're also hoping someone from our bike ped committee would join, and perhaps from the energy committee. So that's a really exciting development. I also attended the Energy Festival and the beta opening. Mighty congratulations to everyone that did that festival. Just extraordinary event. I agree with everything that was said. The exhibitors, the talks, and it was also a lot of fun. I learned a lot. Let me just mention 3 quick things. One, there was someone there showing off their lawn equipment, and I didn't really appreciate how mowers and blowers, electric battery stuff, has really, gotten to where it needs to be. So they had a 60-inch deck, battery-powered mower that runs for 8 hours, that goes 16 miles an hour, which seems like that should do everything we need. And with the IRA, the city will get a $7,500 rebate for each mower that we buy, so they won't be that expensive. So I want to mention that and really encourage us to look at that very, very seriously. He also let me try their blower, which was more powerful than the old gas blower that I had that I got rid of a long time ago. Wonderful battery-powered backpack leaf blowers that were, really, really super. So that was great that they were there. Then I met with someone from the Vermont Energy Education Program who, tying it up with the school board, agreed to come talk to this new school climate committee. So that was cool. And O'Brien presented on their new development. And they said...
Sorry, that's 4 things.
Did I mention too
You
much?
said only 3. I'll let you go 4.
O'Brien presented and said the new homes that they're selling are comparably priced to fossil fuel homes and will either cost the same or less to run, which is amazing that we can do a fossil fuel free home in northern Vermont and hit those price points. So if we can do it here, right, it can be done anywhere. And we've got to really tout that and use this as a model to get the rest of Vermont going and the rest of the country going. So that was really impressive and amazing. And Beta, Helen did a great job. I wouldn't have wanted to be in your position following all those speakers, but thank you.
You're welcome. Great. Okay, so I did a very quick visit to the Energy Fair, but I want to thank everyone for their efforts, and I understand the 300 free ice cream cones went in the first hour. So there were hundreds of people there. So that's great, and I think that's how you really start to engage the public in the meaningful conversations and information sharing about, what you can do. Because when you really think about it, nothing's really going to change or happen unless individuals do that. It can't be just the state saying, here's a program, do it. It needs to be a program that the public understands and can relate to and embrace if they're able. So I think that's wonderful that we're putting that kind of energy into educating the public. That's really helpful. And I did go to the beta grand opening, I guess. And, I walked in and there were 500 people there. It was a lot. And they all had shirts on like I have. And we were all given those shirts. Mine has my embroidered name on it. So I'm not really an employee of Beta Technologies, but I certainly am a big fan. And it was pretty wonderful to hear the comments from, Senator Leahy and the governor and Senator Sanders and Senator Welch and Mayor Weinberger. And then I was the last one, so I was the cleanup batter. And I've never done that before with that kind of list of people ahead of me. But anyway, it went well. And it was, I think, Kyle's opening remarks about the founding of the company, their goals, and how they've really evolved purposefully it was really inspiring. I think it's an example of a corporation that really is right there with treating employees well, sharing the vision, sharing the leadership, and engaging all those active, smart people to better the company. It isn't just a vision that Kyle had, and it's, his vision. It really seems to be evolving with all of his employees. So kudos to them. Okay. The manager's report.
This one I will defer to
So Jesse from Austin, Texas.
Oh, wow.
98 degrees.
About 95. I'm in Austin at the International City and County Management Association annual meeting. And it's really wonderful. Hundreds of sessions, amazing keynote speakers. I was saying to Helen earlier, I went to a session today on how communities across the country organize for sustainability change on the staff side of things, which was really interesting. Anyway, city updates. Just wanted to give you a few quick updates on things, and Steve, of course, jump in if there's other more emergent issues. Nick Gingro joined us today as the Information Technology Director, our new IT Director. We're really excited to have him on board. He was the IT Director for Vermont College of Fine Arts, and he worked at UVM at the business school for a while, as well as Paul Franklin-Collins. So he's a great addition to our team, and I'm sure you will cross paths with him at some point. We are also in what I hope is the final stages of recruiting our next Recreation and Parks Director. So I hope to have an announcement about that in the next few weeks. As Tim mentioned, last week was Town Fair. I had to kick Moreau out of the past president role, stepping down as the president of that board the day before his announcement last week, which was sad for me to kick him out of this role, but he would have been disqualified anyway, stepping down as mayor. But we had a great time at Town Fair, Tim. I was really proud to have you there. And I do want to just share with council, that is something that you all have access to. In fact, any of the VLCT trainings, webinars that you would like to participate in, you can sign up for. You have a budget to do that kind of professional development. So please feel free to talk to me more about it or explore options, and happy to set that up for you in the future. And then I know I emailed the council about this, but I wanted to just call it out publicly as well. Last week, we went live with our computer-aided dispatch for our fire and EMS equipment and professionals. This was a huge, heavy lift by Chief Locke and Chief Burke and all of our dispatchers and many of our fire leadership. It's a new technology, a new innovation, new efficiency for our dispatchers. And we think it will really not only improve our public safety response, but also be an improvement for our dispatchers and how they do their jobs as well. So we look forward to sharing more with you about that as we finalize the kind of dispatch center overhaul in the next 6 months or so. That is what I wanted to share. Steve, feel free to jump in if I've missed anything significant.
No, I think you hit the highlights very well. Thanks.
Great, well, thank you. Okay, moving on to the consent agenda, we have 2 items, disbursements and approval of minutes from the September 18th, 2023 meeting.
Shall I move that we approve the consent agenda?
Second.
Is there any discussion? No questions from Counselor Barrett.
I sent them separately to Martha.
Thank you,
Get an
thank
answer
you.
probably by tomorrow.
Okay, so if you're ready for the vote, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So they are approved. Item 7 is receipt of the transportation implementation plan for the climate action plan, and we are to provide direction to the staff. Erica Quaylen is going to present that as the Deputy Director of Public Works for Capital Projects. So welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Oh, go ahead, Jesse.
Did you want to say something, Jesse?
This is what's so awkward about this. I'm sorry about that. Hi, Erica. I can't see you, but I'm glad you're there. So I just wanted to start this conversation by saying, when the council adopted the climate action plan just about a year ago, one of the things we talked about at that point was that the implementation of that policy then moved to the city staff. So as you may remember, we have 3 different implementation plans we're working on. This is the first to come to you. Then there will be the government operations one, and then the building and thermal one, which we honestly have not started yet. So these are how the professionals that we've drawn together to figure out how we're going to implement the policy the council has set has developed, and it's quite extensive. Huge appreciation to VHB and to Erica specifically in pulling together this work, and I look forward to hearing what your reaction. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. And before I get started, Tim, I did the same thing with a beta employee at an Institute of Transportation Engineers conference. I was having dinner at the same table as him, asked him about their new facility. It was starting construction at the time. And he was like, wrong beta. So you're not alone in that. But good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Erica Quaylen, Deputy Director of Capital Projects for Public Works. And tonight I'm going to be giving an update on a lot of work that has been done in the last 8 months, almost a year at this point, on the Climate Action Plan, Transportation Sector Implementation Plan. It is a big mouthful, so we've been calling it the Transportation CAIP, if you hear me refer to it as that. So tonight I'll give you a little bit of a background, the goals of the implementation plan. We went through a pretty robust public outreach process throughout this, a review of those high impact action plans that were in your packet, the supporting action matrix, and then the implications for staffing and budget, especially as we get ready to have a lot of budget conversations. This will not have a small impact. So rewinding a bunch to August 2017, the council at the time passed a resolution on climate change, and since then it has progressed pretty steadily to the point of September and October of last year. The city's climate action plan was adopted by the task force and ultimately by the council. And so our transportation climate action implementation plan began in November, so just after you adopted that plan, with funding and technical support from the Regional Planning Commission, the CCRPC. Through their annual work program, we received funding assistance through that program that we got started on this effort. And like Jesse said, we worked with VHB as the consultant, still wrapping up the project. So the main goals of the implementation plan here are to first look at the high impact actions that were adopted in the principal plan for the transportation and land use sectors. And there were 10 of those, and develop a really in-depth step-by-step plan, look at some deeper estimates, equity considerations, opportunities for innovation there, and really dive deep on those 10. And our advisory group chose to elevate one of the supporting actions about EV infrastructure in existing buildings to the level of a high impact action. They saw that as important and needing more detail coming out of this plan. The land use sector was more of a technical effort from VHB. They produced a land use memo. I don't remember if that was in your packet. Okay, we can share that. And that was a much more Paul Connor-led effort, talking about promising practices, other cities that have implemented different types of policies in terms of land use to achieve the high-density, mixed-use type of environment that is called for in the principal plan. Like I said, we had a pretty robust engagement process. We had an advisory group that was appointed by Jessie at your September 19th meeting, I believe. She presented how that was going to work. And then finally, this is all going to be wrapped up into a giant implementation plan. And we're hoping this can also serve as a bit of a template for the other sectors as we progress on those ones, which includes some background information, key definitions on some terms that are brought up, the high impact actions, the supporting action matrix I'll give you a little preview of, and then a kind of roundup. So this effort internally was led by myself and Paul Connor. We had project support, like I said, from the RPC and VHB, and our advisory group was a really far-reaching group. They were an awesome group of people. They reviewed the implementation plans throughout the process. We have folks from local policy on our committees, some technical advisors here from key stakeholders that will need to continue working with, some educational organizations, and then, excuse me, maybe I shouldn't have picked a sparkling tea, and then some advocacy folks so that we could really take into account equity, and they were a big help on our public outreach. So the primary effort of our outreach was a questionnaire that went out. You probably saw various email blasts and flyers. The word got out. We had 269 respondents, which was great considering it was right after the city plan questionnaire went out. So a lot of folks, they all lived or worked or some combination in South Burlington. And some of the key things here was that over half of respondents, just over half, were interested in owning an electric vehicle. 13% of respondents already owned one. But there are, as there always is, going to be a chunk of people who like their current vehicle. They like their gas vehicle. So that was about 24% here. And a lot of people expressed interest in compact development, using transit more, improved walk and bike infrastructure. So they're interested in a lot of the things that we want to move forward and need to move forward with. We also hosted 2 focus groups. The first one was with the seniors at their monthly luncheon. That was really helpful, and hearing from a group of folks who might travel a bit differently, maybe have different mobility needs. So we learned a lot from them, and we tried to do one with retail service workers, and we did not get much participation out of that. So we are hoping to figure out how to do it better. We offered stipends and lunch and hosted it right near the 2 plazas that we were trying to work with. But limited participation, but there is a new effort that's going on about equity and planning and public outreach that Paul is going to be working on, and some of the planning and zoning folks. So hopefully we can learn how to do it better. We thought we had checked some of the key boxes, but there's more we can do, so we'll learn from that. So quick overview on that land use, and then we'll get into some of the bigger action items here. So like I said, this is about the relationship between land use and the emission reductions called for in the principal plan. And so it went through 3 broad categories: planning concepts. Some of these terms you've probably heard. The 15-minute city got its minute in the spotlight recently for various reasons. But the 15-minute city, the 20-minute suburb is one that is known a little bit less about. Some practices that are starting to be looked at in various cities, and then practices that are really just tried and true, and how best we can implement them within South Burlington. So I will make sure that gets out to all of you. So jumping into the real heart of this plan right now is the high impact action implementation plans. Like I said, there are 10 of these that were already listed as high impact action, and one that was elevated into a high impact action. These are all associated with our 2030 targets. You're all very familiar with how the principal plan works here. So the next few slides have a lot of text. I'm going to give you just a quick overview.
We have them in front of us.
Yeah. So within each of these implementation plans, these are all of the different pieces that have been put together. The high level information, who's going to be involved and who we need to bring in outside of the city. An estimated timeline, what type of funding, and if there are external funding sources available, and identifying some grant programs, level of effort, which is really identified of if it's going to be really an upfront workload or if it's more of an ongoing planning, enforcement, something like that effort, and if we would need external technical support. The key implementation steps is the big chunk of this, of how to get from the text of the action to the emissions reduction that we're looking for. Some opportunities for innovation, things that aren't necessarily needed but are good opportunities or things that we could plan for, while putting in EV chargers to think about how they have the vehicle to grid capacity. Think about things that we can look to in the future. How to really think about equity when these are being implemented, where costs might be passed on to folks and how we could try to avoid them, and how different policies can be structured so that it's reaching the most amount of people. Some considerations, just things that might be hurdles, trying to identify at least some of them, because there will be plenty, identify them before we really get into it. And then some additional resources, if there are state reports. Drive Electric and Efficiency Vermont have done so much great work that now it's in one place so that we can look for it. And then case studies of other cities around the country and many in Canada that have implemented similar things. So this is a sample one for folks so that you could look at them before. I won't dwell on this for very long, but you can just see what might be involved within each of these. And 2 I'll just call attention to are that focus on equity, of an example here of how parking management or maximums could impact folks inequitably. In some ways it can be helpful from an equity consideration. Limiting parking allows for more space and less barriers to development of increased housing. If we were to go to a paid parking, how to make sure that fines are put out equitably on folks. And then the implementation considerations, like I said, just things to think about if we had to start managing public parking in a new way, and other ways that we can incorporate it with other efforts. So this is a snip of that supporting action matrix. The 11 high impact actions all got something like this slide before. The remaining 14, the number is in your memo. The remaining 14 fell into a matrix that looks like this. These are just 2 of the actions, and it's much of the same stuff, just in an abbreviated format. And a lot of these are also ones that aren't as city-led. So things that the school is taking on, they'll want to dig in deeper in how they see fit to implement things, but laying out some options and just getting some of the groundwork there. So this is the stuff that is very important to all of you sitting up there, is getting into how this impacts municipal operations. First, from a staffing standpoint, and then that leads directly into budget, not just for additional staff, but all of the projects that come out of this. So, like I said, we looked at the upfront and ongoing workload requirements, and the types of work that we looked at are in two different categories. The first one is scoping, planning, funding, and design, so the more upfront work. And then bids, procurement, construction, and maintenance is much more ongoing. Some of these don't have much maintenance, others have a lot. So here are some examples of just what type of work would fall under each of these. The studies, finding funding, connecting with all of those implementation partners. And then some of these are, we would have to hire a contractor to build new types of parking, to put in public EV spaces, things like that. So there's a huge spreadsheet. I have pared it down to the pathways that are in and I have the spreadsheet open separately if you want at any point to look at the numbers a bit deeper. Pared that down into just the pathways that are related to how those 2030 targets are to be met. So this is showing as an FTE, a full-time equivalent, and so these are just for the scoping, planning, funding, and design stuff. So this is more of the planning and zoning folks or project management on design work. And at its peak, it's in FY27, and that is 2 people. There's this kind of arc, which all of these have, because there's a huge upfront workload, and then certain things, ideally, the capital costs have been passed, and we're now into more maintenance mode. The next one, that second phase of bids, procurement, construction, and maintenance, again goes through a similar curve, but as you'd expect, it's pushed out a little bit more because you can't do a lot of this until you've done that first step. And this peaks at the end at 3 people, of needing 3 new people to maintain or do enforcement of new requirements for developers, things like that. Mm-hmm. And so those work out to these numbers here of new staff people, topping out in FY28 at 4.4 people. It's hard to hire 0.4 people. So between 4 and 5 people. And this was our best guess at what would be on top of the staff capacity we already have.
And that is for all the pathways or just for these 2?
All of the actions fall into these pathways.
Oh, okay.
So all of the...
So we don't have to multiply this by 6 or something.
Nope. This accounts for all of the actions. So the pathway is T.1, and so all of those you would see like T.1.1, 1.3, things like that.
Okay.
And so assuming roughly $115,000 per FTE, that caps out at $506,000 in FY28.
So Eric, if I can interject for just a second, Helen's question.
Yes, absolutely.
So how Eric answered that is absolutely correct. It's by pathway for this implementation plan. This is just one of 3 implementation plans, though. So want to asterisk that as well.
Yeah, maybe a few asterisks because I have some more slides with larger numbers.
So, and again, the 506,000, that is in aggregate between FY24 through FY28, or no, it peaks.
That is the
in just
peak.
FY.
So in FY28, $506,000 would be added to the budget to cover 4.4 people.
Right.
For just this pathway.
For just the transportation and land use,
Yep.
yes. So this is not including the government ops or the building and thermal. This is just transportation and land use.
And are we imagining that we'll do all 3 at the same time? Is this an iterative process, or are we talking about, two people for each segment?
And that's for us to determine, but I believe it was a 10-year plan, right?
Well, it stopped
The
at
work-
230.
2030, right.
So it goes,
7 years.
yeah, so that's why we're showing to FY31 here. And it is a little tricky because this is just the first one put in front of you. So we don't know where people can be used, like that 0.4 might go up to 5, but you'll actually get double the amount of actions done. It won't necessarily be 3 times the amount of people when you have
Okay.
three implementation plans to plan for.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging.
So next is the budgeting estimates, not of the people, but of the stuff the people will be doing, the projects, the things that we'll see on the ground that are the things that will be hopefully bringing about the emission reductions that we're looking at. On all of the implementation plans and in the supporting action matrix, all of the projects just have a simple 1 through 5. And so that breaks out to what's shown here. It's dropped into a table in your memo that I'll show. And so this, it's important to note, this is only costs borne by the city. This does not talk about the projects that a developer would be asked to take on to meet amended LDRs, for example. This is just for what we would have to pay to get those things done, what it would cost to study them, what it would cost for the bike ped projects.
But this doesn't reflect the possibility to find external funding
Correct.
for these
This is-
projects. So when we look at those numbers, it isn't necessarily tax dollars.
Exactly.
Hopefully will be lots of the federal dollars that everyone is touting and the state dollars as a way to support this. So
Every implementation plan has at least 2 grant programs shown there. So
What is generally the local share for these kinds of programs?
it depends. A lot of transportation projects that are state and federal are an 80-20, so we have a 20% match. I'm not sure. I think I saw Lou Brzee on here, but he might know some more of the like federal energy programs, what their match is. But transportation is 80-20, and I will say it doesn't ever get better than that. But it's so between 50-50 and 80-20.
and that includes the bike things
yes.
as well. Yeah,
Yep.
that's part of that transportation dollars.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So like the bike ped grant that was just received for Heinsberg Road, we have a 20% match.
Okay.
And this is only FTE costs, not capital costs.
We're moving into capital costs now.
Right.
Before that 506 was the FTE, and now we're moving into actual projects.
And just to be clear, everything that we're looking at does not reflect any federal grant or, so these are the gross aggregate costs.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So those 11 high-impact actions that received their own fully fleshed out implementation plan, they fell into this category. They're pretty spread out. The 2 to really know are those more than $5 million ones. One is a park and ride, or park and rides, which are, there are different opinions on how well they work or not, but they are expensive. There are some opportunities for innovation that VHB laid out in the implementation plan that could potentially reduce costs. But something like that is also ripe for grant funding. That's a transportation project that there is support for efforts like that. And the other one is the walk bike plan. And it's not that the creation of that master plan costs $5 million. It's that coming out of that plan, there will be a lot of recommended projects. So all of those other projects I come to talk to you about, all of those combined are that greater than $5 million.
Some of these, it strikes me, I'm wondering, like the park and rides potentially have the ability to be shared between several municipalities. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the people who drive to like the Staples Plaza area. Some are interested in working in Burlington or at the hospital or UVM or downtown, and then others in that area come off the interstate and they're working at Beta or on Logic or
Right.
whatever our big employers are.
Yeah, partnerships is a huge one that's in the opportunities for innovation in this plan, whether it be with the private property owner, if we strategically site it in a grocery store or shopping area that has ample parking, maybe we lease 50 of those spaces, 30 of those spaces. So there are a lot of opportunities for that to be less. But again, worst case scenario is what we're laying out here. No federal funding. We're putting in the platinum version here.
So, okay, since Helen's jumping in here, in addition to lane reductions, how are we encouraging people to stop driving in their single occupancy vehicles?
Internal combustion engine occupancy.
Right. Well, I would even say electric. I mean, everything comes from a source of energy. So, I mean, there are models out there where people basically say no cars within the municipality.
Yep.
You park on the outside and you use public transit in. I mean, is this a way for us to move towards that, the lane reductions, for instance? Would there be then the bike lanes, the pedestrian lanes, more space for bus lanes? I mean, what are you thinking about here?
So a lot of these obviously work really closely together. So lane reduction, a lot of the spots where that might be recommended will probably come out of the walk bike plan. And things like high density development is going to call for different types of streetscapes that would be doing a lot of these. So I wouldn't say that there is one that will do that. The T2 point, any of those falls under the pathway of reducing vehicle miles traveled. The 1 point are all electrification. So all of these are taking really a different approach to that. Some of them are about increasing transit to just make a different option more appealing to folks and more convenient. And then others are about making it maybe more difficult to get to where you want to go, whether that is making parking harder to find or having it be paid, or there's just not much there. And in a walk bike plan, it might say, oh, this road can actually go down to 2 lanes from 4.
And would we be able to do that on state highways?
If it is a class 1. So Williston Road, for much of it through South Burlington, is a class 1. So we have control over it, which is why we could put in those 2 crosswalks without asking VTrans to do that for us. Heinsberg Road is not a class 1. That is VTrans owned and maintained, all of 116. And it is the same for Shelburne Road. We have some maintenance agreements. We take care of the sidewalks on Shelburne Road, but the state manages within the curb. So we have a lot of flexibility within a class 1 and much less so on a
That would be
non-class 1.
Williston. And Dorset Street, we have control over.
Yep, that is not a state highway. That is fully a town highway.
Spear, right. Right.
Yep.
Okay.
So before we move to the next one, it is a tiny little bullet here, but it's fleshed out more in your in your memo, in your packet, that for all of these, when trying to lay out a better guess at what the cost would be like yearly, a number, not a range, had to be applied to all of these. So what I did was I picked the middle. So under 100,000, I put it at 50 when I laid it out, 100 to 500, 250.
Okay.
And so for the greater than 5 million, I mean, who knows what the middle is there? But I did $7.5 million.
Okay. Well, that seems logical
I thought so.
for a working draft.
And so the way that this got broken out, you have a larger spreadsheet in your packet as an attachment to your memo. And I also have it open, so happy to show you under the hood of this if you want to. But so the FTEs were broken out by year. And so what I did was took the ratio of that year's FTE to the total amount of FTE and applied that same ratio to that total cost. So if it was 0.1 FTE out of 1 and the project was $100,000, that means 10,000 was applied to that year. And so that's how it was broken out. And so when all of those actions, this is high impact and supporting actions, and all of the supporting actions fell into that less than $100,000, except for one of them that fell into the 100 to 500,000, I believe it was. So all of the actions are included here, all 25 of them, and they broke out to this much needed per year. And again, this is worst case scenario with that estimated in the middle with no external funding required is what this worked out to be. And this is showing it summed with the FTEs and those project costs that we just looked at. And so this tops out a little bit sooner, and that's because of where some of the FTEs for the more expensive projects landed. So it tops out at about $5 million, and that is not far away. That is an FY26. So I think I need to get to grant writing. So FY24, we put very little there because we are already months into FY24. But the spending really ramps up, and that's not to say some of these projects aren't already in the budget. Things like some of the paths or LDR amendments that you often see are moving towards some of these actions already. So that 1.75, maybe half of that is already in a CIP as planned. So that will be something that we'll all be tasked with in our departments to really lay out, and as we dig into these more and more. But so this is kind of your worst case scenario, is that we need a cool $5 million in 2 years.
So are you suggesting that with the current staffing has some of the capacity to go after grants, not necessarily manage those projects that the grants would pay for? Or are we really thinking that we really won't have a grant writer or this kind of energy person till 2025?
I see you getting ready to talk, Steve, so go for it.
Do you have the answer for that?
I think it's a yes and no, because some of these are capacity we already have, and so those project costs, some of us are already working on that. The FTEs are the above and beyond. So there are folks already working on some of these grants and are keeping an eye on things that are coming down the pipeline. So it's a little bit of both.
But those, am I correct in stating that those resources that we have, we don't actually have excess capacity for grant writing at the moment, right? Like if we were to they would be redeployed on writing grants for existing projects or for other city municipal functions.
I think it goes back to what Eric is saying. There's capacity to do a little more, but you're not going to get the horsepower you need to do all of this work with existing staff.
Okay.
So
Hey guys, I don't think you can see me. Can I jump in?
Yeah,
Yes, please.
we were waiting.
Can you see me? I don't know if you can see me.
Oh, there we go.
Yes, there you are.
Okay. So I just want to go where Steve was going there. I would argue that especially this, well, I think there are a few CIP projects that are currently on the books that double dip with this work. This is all new staffing. I think if we are going to deploy staff to start writing grants and managing these projects, it means we're not going to do some of the other capital projects that you all have on the list.
Okay.
So I guess I would really encourage you, especially coming off of our budget goal conversation where you had pretty strong conversation about not wanting to erode our current level of service on, building out city center and investing in housing and public safety and whatnot, that this is not in place of core, what I consider core municipal services. This is in addition to that to further the policy goals you all have set. Not saying it can't be offset with grants, but grants aren't going to pay for the staffing we're going to need, and grants are not going to pay for in total the capital investment we're going to need.
Okay. And
But does staffing, is it included in the 80-20 split?
No, the staffing is that separate number that
So that's not an 80-20, right, it's okay,
that is ours
General.
too.
okay.
So this FTE line is not something a grant could cover. The project costs are things that there are grants available for. But again, those projects, like Jesse is saying, those projects can't necessarily be done without those FTE costs being taken on to bring on more folks.
so grants never pay for project oversight? They just pay for the materials for something?
They will pay for, sometimes there are in-kind services where our time towards it can be tracked and be used as an in-kind match. And in
right.
other cases where maybe it's a construction grant, it will pay for our construction inspector to do that type of oversight, but not for our staff to be.
So when we
doing our-
think about the ARPA money, which we have in a bank account somewhere, that could be deployed for some of these FTEs, at least in the first or second year, to really get stuff going. I assume once you start writing these grants and getting some familiarity with what's available, that it's a little easier to identify the next round for projects and for grants. So that would be helpful.
So you're suggesting more than one FTE with ARPA? Because right now we just have one FTE with ARPA.
I don't know. I hadn't seen this, so that's a conversation we could have.
I think my question is, are we allowed to use ARPA funds legally for headcount?
Yeah.
Yes. You have to buy
Or
something
anything.
or pay
Yeah.
somebody.
I think it can pay for
you can't
people.
put it in the
We've
pension
used it
fund.
for the last
Below.
couple of years. I think Jesse probably has the real answer.
We're below a threshold, Tyler.
So because we took ARPA funds as lost revenue funds, which any community in the country under $10 million of income loss could do, we are allowed to use ARPA funds for anything that is a typical municipal service within our jurisdiction. So because the state allows us to work on climate change things, we can use ARPA dollars for that. I think the thing I would suggest the council think about as they're thinking about using one-time funds for those is that one of the reasons the implementation advisory group laid it out this way was that there are ongoing financial commitments that will be required not only to meet those goals, but to meet what I anticipate to be the next round of goals. So if you're going to use one-time money, how are we hiring staff that has some certainty to know they're going to be able to continue this work out to meet those FY30 goals? And that's not with one-time money.
Yeah. And I just want to keep in everybody's mind too, this idea that the Affordable Housing Committee and the Housing Trust Fund Committee are going to bring forward with those revolving funds so that we can get into kind of that virtuous cycle of continued workforce housing development. So there's a
Okay.
lot to think
Do you
about.
have some additional thoughts?
I'm just going to wrap up with some next steps.
Thank you.
But one thing I will say is that these FTEs and the project costs really build on each other, because when you bring someone on, for example, to write grants, because I was writing the Bike Ped CIP draft today, the money that we got for a path is now 5 years worth of one project work to do design, construction, and then it gets turned over to maintenance. So these really build on each other, assuming that the grants are well written. It results in more projects. Just another thing to think about, and why you're seeing the kind of offsets in those peaks.
Right.
So, if there is nothing else on that, I'm happy to wrap up here and answer
Are there any
remaining
other questions?
Yeah.
Andrew has one, or two, or three.
So I have actually two sets of thoughts, comments. I want to talk, give some strategic comments and some tactical thoughts. Let me first start with the strategy. I think it's some of these numbers are pretty daunting, knowing that we have to do another 2 implementation plans, which are going to add, and it would help me to think about this, to have a little more data in the following sense. I'd love to come up with something that I would call an effectiveness score, which would try to estimate the greenhouse gas reduction from each of the 11 items that has costs and FTEs associated with it, divided by the net cost to the city of that item.
That's another FTE.
That shouldn't, and when I mean net cost, like estimate how much grant funding we think we're going to have, how much we allocate, so we get really a true picture of, like, is this, how much bang for the buck are we getting out of each item? It would help me, because it may turn out, and just as an example, right, when you look at the plan, 2/3 of the reduction come from the EV actions, and only 1/3 is intended to come from the VMT. Whereas the VMT actions are a lot more expensive than the EV actions. So you may find that, like, the VMT actions are like, 1/10 is effective, or like something like that. And it'd be helpful to kind of be able to prioritize and see that, like, how effective, how much bang for the buck are each of these actions giving us. And I know it's hard, but I think rough estimates would be really helpful, and I think you can derive some of that from the data in the climate action plan, because the plan does have really precise percentages, right, for how much the actions, how much of the emission reductions each of those big actions give, and then you can, like, prorate that across the sub actions within that. So we can talk some more about that, but I think that would be really helpful. Tactically, thank you for the presentation. I know it was a tremendous amount of work, and I joined many of those sessions. I have some thoughts, I guess, on what I think would be easy, quick wins while we're going through this, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, having gone through it, what you think could be easy, quick wins. But kind of in my mind, we can pass regs to require EV installed, EV ready, and have all new buildings have more EV charging, so we're not, like, digging our hole deeper and have to retrofit. And I would really urge us to, like, think of that as a quick, easy win, and do that, with due haste. Then for parking management, I think TDM, I think there's some really quick wins there. Also on the regulatory front, like Burlington has unbundled the rent for parking spaces from the costs of the rest of the lease to rent the apartment. And what that does is, like, checks a lot of boxes. One, if you don't have a car, you don't have to pay for the parking spot, right? Which could help a lot of low people, but also incent people to not have cars, because and unless you unbundle it, none of those really great things are going to happen.
Right.
And that also seems like a really easy win for us to just, like, do that, and we can regulate that, because we can regulate rentals, and just, like, start that virtuous cycle. So there's some other things we can talk about, but I'd love to, like, while we're comprehensively thinking about this and budgeting out for the next 10 years, also, what are the things we can do in the next 3 to 6 months that are easy, quick, tactical, and let's get started?
Yeah, absolutely. Do other folks on the council want to weigh in?
Well, I just along those lines, I remember a project, hearing about it years ago in Montpelier, where in a multi-family unit home or building, they had car shares as opposed to individual parking spots.
Yeah.
So that's also, I would think, a pretty short-term, I don't know, but I would assume that could be a short-term project.
Okay, so the first one, I'll just to back up, because we've had that conversation internally as a project team, wanting to know that effectiveness to be able to get that kind of benefit cost. And so in talking to folks at the CCRPC, the emission reduction goals laid out in the principal plan, they were deemed possible just by the pathways. And then within the pathways, it was a decision around what were the actions that would fall within it. So the 42% emission reduction by switching to EVs was that was what was shown by the model, not that T.1.2 will give 13% of that and 1.3 will give another 12% of that, because I would love to look at that number and say, okay, this has the benefit cost of a
No, I understand
two.
that. I understand
Yeah.
we couldn't get that granular
Right.
data, but I'm hoping
Yeah.
we can get some rough sense, because without that, it's really hard to know how to prioritize these projects.
What seems obvious is without the plugs, the plug-in hybrid vehicles don't serve a purpose. I mean, they don't. Because they don't serve a purpose. If you can't plug in and recharge your car, you're going to be using your gas in a heavier car because that electric engine is so heavy, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that seems to me to be the pretty obvious thing, is you have to be able to plug in your car.
We
And
need
what
EV charging, yes.
Yes, EV charger, right.
Yeah, and so to get to that exact point, which dovetails into the second one in terms of what are kind of the quick hitting wins from these, looking at the implementation plans, the planned achievements for many of these are amended LDRs. That is the planned achievement for a lot of these, to figure out what that shift needs to be in terms of which parking strategies are the best or most effective, and how to determine what number of EV spaces are required does require some background information and some of that studying. We're going through a TDM project right now with a consultant to do a lot of what is in the TDM and some of the parking, but a lot of TDM effort, which is a supporting action in here. But those ones that are amended LDRs, if those are ones that the council would like to pursue more actively, again, those are also, they do still have the FTE costs, always coming back to those of folks who can manage the projects and manage those studies. But they are things that it's upfront on the city to get those LDR amendments. But then we kind of pass off to say, development community, these are our new LDRs. And so next time you come to us with a request,
Right.
they will meet XYZ.
Right.
I mean, another quick hit on EV charging I would have thought would be to publicize or somehow encourage folks to, for instance, take advantage of those generous grants we learned about 2 meetings ago, which basically fund, right, EV charging for municipalities and businesses, right? I mean, it's out there. We just have to get people to know it's there.
Yeah.
Tim?
So these targets are aggressive, and if you have, dense apartment buildings that don't have any EV charging stations,
Right.
there's no incentive for people to get into an EV or a pluggable EV, right? But the other problem there is there's 2 chicken egg scenarios going on. One is like ability to charge if you're a renter, and can I get into a vehicle that I can afford? And right now, the trend by the vehicle manufacturer is cruising from $40,000 to $50,000 to $60,000 to $70,000 for a car, which is, I mean, that's not where the price point is for the average renter, right? So we're kind of between a rock and a hard place on what the vehicle manufacturers are doing for average family income Americans, right, who would like to get into at least a pluggable EV that gets them around at least 40 miles on electric and the rest on gas if necessary, right? And so we have to pay close attention to what the federal government's going to do to try to incentivize those companies to get a $25,000 pluggable hybrid car out there. The cheapest one I know of is a Prius Prime, and that's $34,000, and that's the base model. So their trajectory is going in the totally opposite direction to what the country needs, because the vast majority of these cars are driven by middle-class Americans, and they're just going to work, coming home, going to the grocery store, and they're not going to shell out. I mean, they're not going to shell out $50,000 for a car, even though all the cars are getting more expensive, So I just want to point that out, that we're challenged on that front as well. But I totally agree with Andrew and Megan that, find the low-hanging fruit first, the ones that because you can lead a horse to the bus, but you can't make it get on, right? You can lead a horse to the to the Ford dealer, you can't make it buy a Mach-E, right? So it's people are only going to behave according to the opportunities that they have. So obviously there are things that are easier and cheaper to do to move, the ball forward.
And we are in a hard situation because of the supply chain issues. I'll just share the story of my son. Now, he does not have a plug-in hybrid. He has the hybrid that recharges when you press on the brake, right? And that is something that he could afford. And he was lucky to get the last one. I mean, that's the thing, is we're up against a lot of headwinds here. And so the car share, to me, seems to be really something that could, and I don't know what's happened in Montpelier. I just heard about it at a conference in Montpelier when they were implementing it, putting it into place, and this was, again, probably 2015 or 16. So I would love to have feedback on how that has worked out for them, and would it be doable here?
Yeah, I didn't know about that program. I have seen places where an apartment building might get a priority space for the actual Car Share Vermont car, where a car is hosted there and serves as a hub, but I haven't heard about a couple of units sharing a space.
Yeah.
I will look at that.
Other comment?
Just one thing I'll mention on cost. Most of these vehicles are eligible for tax credits
Right.
if they're leased.
If they're leased.
If they're leased, because the corporate owner can claim the credit and pass it through the lease. So the Prius through the lease would wind up costing $28, $29 through the lease. So that's a potentially very efficient way.
It all comes down
to get
to
an
the
electric car.
monthly payment, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
The
absolutely.
credit rating of that person when they walk into the dealership, and how hard that dealership's going to try to rip them off, right? Because dealerships are not fair when it comes to taking care of customers to make something affordable for them, right? We've seen that again and again and again, right? And so, unless we bring back the Saturn model, which will never happen again,
Okay.
But so to that point, right, at the energy fair, the gentleman from the Toyota dealership, right, he had the BZDR, the Toyota all electric, right, and so I said, well, what? And he could only get the tax credit through a lease program, and I go, okay, well, what model is this? Oh, it's the top of the line. Okay, well, how much is that going to be for a lease for 36 months? Over $600 a month, and I go, well, that blows that one. What's the base model? Take $100 off. I'm like, okay, so now we're $500 a month, and that's not affordable for the average family, I think, for a car payment. You don't need a car that costs that much to begin with, but that's the cost to the companies
Right.
of mixing all these, the battery costs with the other costs, but then actually there's less labor because it's not as complex as an ICE car. So
It's also cheaper to own and operate, a lot cheaper. So,
Yeah, it may very well be, but at the end of the day, if you have a family that's already struggling to put food on the table, there are 50% of the people in this town rent because they can't afford to own a home. The capital outlay that's required to buy one of these vehicles is it puts it out of reach. It's inaccessible.
Yeah, no, but
Grant programs
if
aside.
you lease, Tyler, and you're saving gas and you're saving maintenance, you just got to do the numbers. It could wind up being cheaper.
That's what my son's doing. And he's got a Toyota,
Yeah.
I can't remember
So
the model.
we need to give you some direction.
Yeah.
So have we yet?
There's definitely some around looking at the best that we can with data that we can find. Work through what some of these are going to be kind of the low-hanging fruit and look at some of this prioritization. It sounds like that is one of the biggest asks from council tonight, is to just understand how best to use this money.
Is
That's
that-
one of the biggest things I'm
I think
hearing.
it's fair, but I think that because of supply issues, we're going to have to look at the LDRs. I really think we're going to have to.
So can I
Really
jump in?
incentivize people to get out of their single occupancy vehicles.
Okay, Jesse, you
hand
wanted
says
to
something.
weigh in?
So just on the direction, I mean, I think Erica summed it up well, but so the LDRs is a great point. And remember, if this is in addition to other priorities you've already set, you have a 4-phased LDR updates that we are currently working on. I think Paul may be in the room, so could talk to you about how some of those other LDR changes are going to layer into what's already on the Planning Commission and your agenda this year for those things. So I think that's another kind of resource, not money resource thing, but kind of political time and energy thing that we do need to think about. And then I guess I would be curious, obviously the team will finalize this implementation plan. That was our charge, and we can add in additional information based on your comments tonight. But if you did have any other direction for us, as we are, staff is very hot and heavy into building the FY25 budget right now, if there were any parameters you wanted to give us about what you would want to see in that budget tonight, we're happy to take those. We're happy to take those anytime before you finalize the budget for the voters. So it doesn't have to be tonight, but if there was any guidance coming out about that, that would be useful as well.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think
We're looking at chargers.
Well, I don't know. Personally, I would assume maybe 2 FTEs rather than 1. It sounds like we're going to need at least 2 FTEs across all these implementation plans, and probably more. And that should, I think, be our baseline.
I tend to agree. I mean, I don't think we're going to get a lot done if we don't have the people to write the grants, manage the projects, get them done. I would agree that going after low-hanging fruit makes sense. And some of that might be generated by, grants are available. I mean, it may not be the lowest hanging fruit, but if it has the most amount of money to fund it, it may make more sense to select that as a priority.
You need to have a project to write a grant, right?
Right.
So you need to have.
We have those.
Yeah, they have all these projects. It's a
And for clarification and things to bring back, in terms of those FTEs, are you thinking that those are something that you want immediately for us to present both in FY25 to kind of stagger those over the next 2 fiscal years? An idea of, is this focused on the grant writing? Is it something a bit more comprehensive that you're imagining? Because we've talked about a lot of the different components of these projects.
We've given you.
I think we need to make a
Yes,
presentation.
I was gonna say, I think it's that
Yeah.
we'll bring them back some
Okay.
ideas to what those people would,
think so too.
what those people would
Yeah.
be used for.
Absolutely. We can do that.
Well, and I think we could use the ARPA money to phase it in, if that's more amenable to budget writing.
We can lay out some options of how that can work, of what they will cost.
But I at least, I mean, just, are most people thinking we need 2 people? I know, Tim, you're rolling your eyes there. This
Or
makes
roll
you
it over 2
uncomfortable.
years. I'd really like to see.
Well, I suspect Jesse would say
What we
she's
can
gonna
do.
bring back a plan that shows this on top of the normal operating budget.
Yes.
And so that you would see the impact of not only core government operations, but this on top of that.
Right.
And what that would look like for the tax rate.
Could we also, since land use regulations have been identified, in that development of a proposal or proposals, Jesse, can we get a sense, or can you get a sense from Paul about their capacity to, what they're working on now that might dovetail with what these projects
Yes.
could be, and then, you pick a couple more that, and what does that look like? Because I think that's what some of us feel is kind of low-hanging fruit, but it isn't if you don't have the staffing and the capacity of the planning commission to act on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul and I have been talking about that a lot, how this phasing is going to work with the 4 phases you've already identified. So we can bring that back to you, adding in this conversation.
Okay, that would be helpful. Others?
Well, if we're over, I just don't want us to over-index on. I'd like to better understand what the changes are that we're proposing with the LDRs. So one of the other concerns that we have, and that we've all addressed, is the cost of housing and the availability of housing. And I just want to make sure that as we're looking at modifying and amending LDRs, that we're not doing so in such a way that's making it that much more difficult to build new housing, or that it's making it more costly. So at some point, how are we going to account for that in the process? What does that look like? And what input are we getting from members of the development community along the way to make sure that we're not solving one problem to create yet another?
Well, certainly the housing crowd was front and center in your advisory group.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm assuming they made that case. Now, maybe there wasn't a developer, a for-profit developer on there. I don't know, but
There was not a developer on there. And we also heard a lot in our comments area and our questionnaire also, which was answered by a pretty wide range of folks. And one thing to note on this last slide here is we will have a public meeting next week to go over all of this stuff here, to hear about if residents are thinking like, oh, I'd really buy into that action. And that one doesn't seem like something me and my neighbors would want to do. Things like that, to have another touch point to the public where we can bring them something a bit more complete to look at instead of just bringing a blank slate.
That's here?
Yes, it will be here on October 12th. There will be a big outreach push in the second half of this week.
Okay.
So that's next Thursday,
Next Thursday, you have the time?
6:30.
6:30 in the auditorium?
Yes, in the auditorium. It will go out in the next City News, on Front Porch Forum, all of the city outlets.
And it's
Great.
specifically the transportation and land use
Yep.
CAIP.
Yes. The information I brought to you tonight is going to be the framing for that conversation.
great.
Great.
Okay.
Can I just respond to Tyler real
You
quick?
certainly
and,
may.
And just say that, if you're planning a 40-unit new apartment building, right? I mean, with the regulations that we want to have in place, there's a percentage of parking spots that they will have to provide the conduit, when they pour the foundation to bring it out from the building and bring it up to the edge of the parking lot, wherever that might be. And then there's going to be a pedestal there with a charge point charger, or they partner with somebody, right, who actually administer the charging, and then the person that lives there will probably have to have their own account to take care of that. But it would probably be some relationship between the property owner that provides the electricity to the charging station, and in the way that it gets billed and stuff like that. So I mean, it's very doable, but it's much cheaper to do it during new construction than it is to do retrofit, right? So, I mean, all these buildings that have underground parking, I can't imagine what that would cost to, I'm sure it can be done, right? But there's just a cost to it, right?
And that makes total sense. I guess all I'm saying is I want to make sure that we're accounting for the voices of the folks who are actually doing it, right? So that we're not inadvertently introducing a lot of cost. That's all.
Okay, we hear you. Good. All right, is that enough to go on? Are you
I
smiling,
think so.
Jesse?
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
We will do our best and come back, especially during budget time and budget retreat, to talk through a lot of the options.
Okay. Thank you very much, Erica.
Thank you.
This was a lot of work, and we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
So. All right, so moving on to item 8. Is Kate online? She's not in the auditorium, is she?
Saw her online.
Yeah, there she is. So, item 8 is consider and possibly approve a school board request to fund traffic monitors at school properties. And we received an email, hi Kate, that outlines what this ask is. Do you want to go over that briefly, Kate? Or
Sure,
do you want
yes.
us to just ask questions, or?
I'm happy to frame it just for a
Okay.
moment. I think I was happy to catch the beginning of the conversation previous to this, and I see our asks around street safety and traffic monitoring around our schools is very tied to the climate action goals and making our city more pedestrian and bike friendly. So I'm glad they're both on the agenda tonight. And a couple of weeks ago, I joined district staff, and Officer Bree was there, and about 20, 25 parents, most who were elementary school students, to discuss school safety broadly and transportation and school safety on the streets came up. And I do just want to share my reflections on that meeting, because I think we did talk about, why don't we bike or walk to school? It's more energy efficient. And really the answer was that the infrastructure and that the culture of walking in climate needs to change. And because our schools are located on some of our busiest streets, Dorset, White Street, we've talked lots about Market Street's increased traffic and development, and even Orchard being so close to Shelburne Road, it just feels like it's a hard ask for parents, especially of younger kids, to give up the safety of a car, the perceived safety of a car. So I think that there's some long-term work to be done on that. But in the meantime, following on the conversation, if my memory serves, earlier this spring, we made a request for crossing guard funding at Rick Marcotte. Historically, there's been a crossing guard volunteer Chamberlain school, and we had a volunteer crossing guard through the last school year. So they were unpaid, but we did request funding last fiscal year from the city, and I believe it was approved in April, as well as the signage for the school zone at Chamberlain. And so I'm coming back with you tonight on behalf of the school board and the school district to see, we do now have the staff for a crossing guard, a paid crossing guard at Chamberlain and Rick Marcotte, and we would like to see that funding as a part of the permanent city budget, if possible. I see that as part of, as aligned with the experts on traffic control and traffic monitoring in Department of Public Works, police officers. There's a lot more traffic control experience in the city than at the schools. And we would like to take the approach of all of our campuses. I think our priority would be the elementary schools that we've already talked about, but I think if we had more of a culture of crossing guards as our city becomes more urban, more developed, then that may promote more walking and biking, as well as keeping our traffic under control and preventing an accident on busy streets at busy, congested times of day before and after school. So that's a quick summary, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Can I just clarify, you're requesting the city to fund 6 traffic monitors at approximately $10,000 apiece. Is this for this current school year, or is it for, is that correct? So it's this current school year?
It's right. For this, my understanding is that the approval that was made in April was for one school and for that fiscal year. So this is a new request for this current school year, this current fiscal year. Yes, and for all of our campuses.
Okay. And you're also requesting that this become a city side of the ledger budgeted expense annually, that the school will never contribute to this? Is that right?
For your consideration, yes.
Okay. Okay, Jesse? No?
Sorry, Kate, you two just clarified what I was going to clarify, that the vote that you all took in April, May, was that you at that point were requested the contribution for FY 2023, the year that ended in June, and funding for that one crossing guard in FY 24 at Rick Marcotte. At that time, you decided to fund the FY23, I think it was about $7,000 request, but hold on future year fiscal planning. And now this additional request has come in, and now there's the long-term request. So that's the kind of sequence of the conversations you've had to date.
Okay. So thoughts for the council? Andrew?
Yeah.
Or
so
if you have any questions?
yeah, no thoughts on questions. Look, if we need the crossing guards, we should hire them, right? The kids need to be able to get to school safely, and hopefully that will encourage more biking and walking. But to me, this is kind of an accounting question. Like, how should we account for this? Should we account for it in the municipal budget or the school budget? Taxpayers are going to bear it regardless. And I guess driving my thinking in terms of how we should account for it are a couple of questions. One is, like, who gives the crossing guards direction as to their, day, their responsibilities when they show up? Who's going to monitor them? Who do they report to? Yep. Kind of, employee
Hiring
type.
and firing.
Yeah, hiring and firing, like all those kind of things you'd ask about to figure out, where an employee fits in the hierarchy.
So I think and Kate, correct me if you have a different impression moving forward, but the conversation the superintendent and I have had to date is that this is funding given in lump sum to the school district to employ folks. That because of the connection needed between the school administration, scheduling hours of service, in-service, early dismissals, vacations, et cetera, those professionals really need to report up through the education line, but that this would be funding. How it was going to work in FY23 is they were going to pay for the staff, and then we were going to reimburse them for those costs. We never ended up doing that, so that money is still in the fund balance, because thankfully Sue, who is also on here, I think, Sue Connolly, very generously volunteered to do it. My understanding is that these staff would report up through the education side of things, and we would give them a grant. I think if you do approve this as a permanent cost moving forward, we do need to think about we need to come up with some kind of legal agreement that allows us to do that. Because I think that we could, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know if Colin's in the room, but I think we could get into some sticky Act 60 issues with, more privileged communities municipally funding things on the education side.
Yes.
Burlington does do this on the municipal side. Winooski, Montpelier do it on the education side. So there's examples of both in the state, and we just want to come up with a really clear legal agreement of how to do that.
Jesse, so there are no other items in our city like this?
If they're prohibited by Act 60.
The only other item in our city that's sort of like this actually works in reverse, which is from time to time, the recreation department has access to school gymnasiums to run programs that we have access to that building. And it's obviously a school asset, school staffed. Our staff goes in and runs the program, but we have access to the asset.
And the solar panels might generate some excess that goes to the schools, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Good.
That's
So-
right, yeah, 40%
Yeah.
goes to the schools.
Well, whatever's, depending upon the production, whatever, the wastewater gets it first, right? So
No,
I think,
I mean, the
The
solar
the
field
landfill,
that we have,
the landfill.
the farm,
yeah,
the landfill, no, 60% comes to the city and
Yeah.
40% goes to
There-
the schools.
I thought there was a cascading, and if there's enough power to satisfy that, there is, but if there isn't, it falls off, I think, as you go down the
Oh,
cascade.
well, maybe it
but
does,
anyway,
but
so,
Look at the details.
kind of a
I-
lump sum.
I would like to comment on this.
Yes,
So,
please.
I understand the request. I don't favor the city funding this money except for in the Market Street corridor, as long as there's construction that conflicts with, the safe passage of kids. So I wouldn't have a problem, like, as long as there's building going on that's, reducing sidewalk width, then I think the city has some responsibility there to the school department, but not for the other two schools. I don't want to get entangled like this long-term at all. I don't think this is our responsibility to pay for this.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I tend to share Tim's viewpoint. It would definitely set a precedent, and never say never, but I think that it has to be stated that this would be a precedent, and it would, be a divergence from long-standing policy, which, except for the two examples with regard to recreation and solar energy credits, really keep the two budgets separate. If we could have a conversation about this at our dinner, upcoming dinner in November, have a more lengthy conversation and thoughtful conversation. I'm assuming that this comes from some budgetary needs, and I'm aware that there have been some unexpected cost overruns with the ZEMS. So this would be something I'd want us to talk about as a steering committee. We certainly do not want the school, to not be able to provide for its students. So, but I'm not prepared tonight to set a precedent without kind of a more thorough discussion of it.
Okay. Tyler?
May I respond?
Oh,
Go ahead, Tyler.
I am on the respectfully disagree. I'm on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, in that if there's already prior case law that suggests that municipalities do this for the purpose of traffic safety and it doesn't interfere with Act 60, and that we don't have exposure there, I think that keeping our kids safe is our top priority, and I'd like to see our school dollars, the school budget dollars, go into educating the children as much as possible and not be used to make sure that they don't get mowed down on their way to school. So, and if we are entertaining policy measures that could increase, and I know that there's caveats and I know that there's grants, but if on one hand we're looking at policies and procedures that could potentially increase our overall budget by 10% for climate change, can't we find $60,000 to make sure that our kids aren't at risk when they go to school? If we're going to be encouraging them and we're going to be incurring all this extra expense and cost to get them to get outside and to get to school safely, I feel like we need to deliver in other areas, i.e. do whatever we need to do to make sure that they can do so safely.
okay. Kate, did you want to comment or respond?
Yeah, thanks. I'll take the chance to respond. So thanks, Tyler. Much of what I wanted to reiterate, I think you shared. There is precedent already set both in Burlington and by the approval of the crossing guard funds by this council in April. So I just wanted to clarify that the request isn't really tight because there are budgetary concerns with the school. It's more of a philosophical belief that our school funding should and our education funding should stay within the school operating budget and be focused on educating our students. And we see this as traffic control, public works, traffic safety. And I think that, the agreement for the initial lump sum that was established, I think would be I'd like to ask for your consideration to extend that at least for Rick, Marcotte, and Chamberlain through this school year. And then perhaps, so just for those two schools, and then perhaps we can have a longer term conversation with more information and a different agreement for more of a long-term permanent solution. But I do think that as our city develops, our streets change, that it's important for our traffic monitors and crossing guards to be aligned with what's happening with this in our cities, with construction, with development, and not solely isolated to the student safety in schools, but really seen as a community service.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I apologize if I am under misunderstanding here. But we're also paying for the Chamberlain School crossing guard right now, not just the one here on Market Street. Okay.
We're not paying for any right now.
Oh.
We did authorize, I think it was $7,000 for, that seems high now that I say that out loud. You authorized some amount of money for the remainder of the FY23 crossing guard at Rick Marcotte, but they were never able to hire anyone. So they never drew down those funds. So, and we did not approve at that time the FY24 request, thinking we would come back and revisit it if it continued.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I just, to be the devil's advocate, Kate, is this the nose under the tent, so to speak, so that a couple years from now, the conversation is, well, busing is a safety issue. The city has far more experience with managing roads and lights and busing. I mean, I appreciate the need for children to be safe. I also would want, if we're going to take over some of these costs, to have a better conversation or thinking about if we have crossing guards, then is there a way to identify neighborhoods that are really close to a school where with a crossing guard, all of the children in that neighborhood could walk to that school? I mean, I have to say I was sort of startled when we were at the opening of the CHT building. And the school bus, while we were there, stopped and 10 children got out from Marcotte.
Not from the middle school.
No, it was from Marcotte. They were little kids. And I thought, oh my goodness, we're using a bus to take kids 2 blocks. And so, it's a, to my mind, it's kind of a broader conversation. If we really do want kids safe and we also want a walkable, safe community, how do we, or where do we have a conversation with the school, I guess, about, so are there areas where we're not going to offer school busing because you can walk safely? Because we have crossing guards or crossing lights or whatever. So I'm reticent to pay for all of this just as a matter of course.
So a slippery slope to school safety is probably a slippery slope I'd be willing to happily go down, but I have to say that the school district and school board's intention here is simply to address a rising concern about our students' access to buildings safely. And I appreciate the stop signs and the school zones that have happened. And this is part of a larger conversation to address students and families not feeling safe in our current infrastructure getting into our schools. And it's not a transfer of costs because we don't have crossing guards anywhere. The crossing guards that we've had have been on a volunteer basis at Rick Marcotte and Chamberlain. Sorry, I misspoke earlier. So, we have hired Chamberlain and Rick Marcotte crossing guards. Those are the only positions that currently exist. So it's not that the school district is currently paying for $70,000 that we want to transfer to the city. It's that we would like to see a further investment in the city on street safety impacting our students in our schools.
Okay. Andrew?
So as I said, we should have the crossing guards. I think to me it's just an accounting question, and it's pretty clear to me that because the school decides who to hire, who to fire, when they work, how they work, where they work, whether they're doing a good job or a bad job, it's properly accounted for on the school budget. If this was a DPW employee that we, the city, hired and told where to stand and where to work and how to work and when to work, then it would be our cost. But it's pretty self-evident to me that this should be on the school budget because it aligns with the responsibilities and obligations.
I respectfully disagree. Because I think that the responsibility and obligation of the city is to make sure the kids have a safe way to get to school. And if we're not providing that with the current infrastructure, then that should be on us. And we should be willing to foot the bill to make sure that it's safe until such time that we're willing to make concessions elsewhere for that to,
Well,
for
why
us to do
isn't
so.
it on the school?
To make sure that the kids can, that the infrastructure around the school is safe for them to walk to school. I don't think that's, I think our school's responsibility is to educate our children and not to try and play municipality.
I'm open to the philosophical discussion. I guess, to my mind, the crossing guards are at the entry to the schools. So it is on, the school grounds, and I would assume that the schools also, just like Andrew explained, did background checks like they do on everybody, even who wants to, take kids on a field trip. So there are requirements that clearly the school would have to handle with regard to these employees. And the money comes from the same taxpayer pocket. I mean, I don't quite understand why it would be on the city budget as opposed to the school budget when it comes from the same pocket.
Right.
And I'm open to the philosophical discussion, but to my mind, we're talking about the entries to the schools. So we're talking, along the same lines as the school buses. And I understand that that's been the philosophy of the school district. I've long said, why not let kids take the city buses to school? In my neighborhood, for instance, the kids could get on the city bus, and my kids have gotten on the city bus, but that's my right saying I allow my kids to go on the city bus. And the answer from the school district has been, well, we are in charge of getting the kids to school safely, right? So, unless the parent takes it on themselves. So there is something that's already in the school philosophy. So I would need to hear more about how the school philosophy is changing to really have the city take on, this part of.
I think Barb Service wanted to make a comment. We did see her face there. We can't hear you, Barb. You're on mute.
I did. Thank you, Helen. As a taxpayer and a former administrator, I have to say that I think Andrew probably said it as clearly as anyone. I'm going to have to pay for this either way. I think it belongs in the school district budget because it's part of what happens for kids. On the other hand, I'm sorry, I don't remember who, but someone talked about if we need special guards when there is construction going on. I think that's a totally different issue. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone disagrees that we want our kids to be safe. But if the school district is going to hire, they're going to fire, they're going to supervise, then let's put the money in that pot and let them be responsible for all of it. And you put that in that part of my tax bill. And then let the city do its part. I think it has great potential to be really muddy. I am concerned about what it could mean in the future. And I think it is easier to all agree that our first concern is the safety of the children, and that we share that. But beyond that, we need to keep some of those things separate. And so what happens from the time that that youngster is on his or her way to school, whether that's on the bus or walking, and let's hope as a kid who walked to school, and I didn't walk in 3 feet of snow, but as a kid who walked to school, that was a good thing for me to do. But I think that we need to separate those two functions, that this really is a school function, especially when you're talking about the school district is going to hire and fire and supervise. Then I want to pay for that out of my school dollars and trust the city to do its part, to do things like put up the signs on Market Street, and people are still rolling through the stop signs, but it's getting better. But keep those two functions separate. So I would lobby strongly for keeping the two things separate, but agreeing that our first concern is the safety of the children, and the taxpayers are going to pay for it either way. Thank you.
Well, I guess if I could, Helen,
Yeah.
I would love to hear from
Yeah.
the school board and the superintendent about what would putting it in the city budget do with regard, to kind of the city values. I mean, we all agree that we want the kids to be safe. So is the philosophy have to do with, well, then the city, meaning, that these children are like residents and so we are going to put it in the city side of the budget? Is there something that the school board sees as the public will support this? I need to have that philosophy really fleshed out for me, because to my mind, I don't separate the school budget from what matters to me, right? It's just part of that umbrella. So but if that is a concern, I want to hear that. And that's why I want us to have a discussion, because clearly this request comes from a philosophical viewpoint. So I want to hear it. I want to.
Well, is that a conversation we have? We've got someone in the audience who would like to speak. You have to come up to the mic, please. But
Could I just
have
make
a
a quick
question about
statement?
when does this decision need to be made? Megan wants a philosophical conversation, potentially at a dinner or at a steering committee meeting of some sort, to talk more broadly. And
I want to be convinced. I'm not
Yeah.
convinced, Kate. And so I want to give you the chance to convince me.
although if we vote not to fund this tonight, it doesn't mean we can't come back to it if there's a philosophical argument.
I guess, I sorry to interrupt. I just would like to know from Kate, if we vote not to do this tonight, does the school board have the ability or have the budget to be able to execute on it if they
Well, we
feel
don't
it's
necessarily
necessary?
have the budget either. This isn't in our budget either.
Well, we have a surplus.
Well,
That's
good. Yeah, we're spending it on lots of things. but
Yep.
That's
We're struggling over how we're going to get to do what we want to do.
I have a hard time thinking that there's too many things that are more important to making sure
Well-
kids don't get run over on the way to school. Particularly when also let's not forget, and I apologize if I'm being crass, but I think it's also important to recognize that the city also changed the game on, at least at Central School, with how Market Street's constructed and the new traffic patterns and the volume of traffic that's going through there. That's new and that's different. And the ongoing construction does create an ongoing concern. So I guess my question is, Kate, if we don't vote on this tonight, what does the school board have the ability to do this year in order to make it happen? And number two, if the answer is nothing, would we be willing to consider doing something as an interim measure tonight, but calling it just that, so that we could just resolve the problem immediately and then figure out how to deal with it long term moving forward?
Okay, this is why we need the philosophical discussion. The city center has been on the books since the 1980s, right? The steering committee has been in since the beginning of South Burlington. So let's just really be clear. The city center did not come from nowhere, and everybody was fully aware that it was in the process. So I don't mean to be accusatory, like I feel that you are being a little bit accusatory. We all are in favor of the safety of our kids. Okay, I just want to make that really, really clear.
And no one is saying otherwise.
And in addition, the city helped take care of the Marcotte School's 3-acre stormwater rule with the interaction with the parking lot and the stormwater
Oh, we also
facility.
made there a road into the school.
Right. I mean, there are a lot of changes that happen in City Center, and I think that's where the focus should be on what we said we might be able to help with, right, during construction, when there's no sidewalks. I understand that.
Right.
But in general, from a philosophical point of view, this is a school budget responsibility. It's not our responsibility. Right?
Well, I would be supportive of your comment earlier that for the duration of construction on Market Street, which I think is going to go through the whole year because we got some new stuff coming on across the street, so it's going to be torn up for a while. I think that that's a fair enough and a reasonable, and philosophically it seems to make sense that that's could be seen as a city responsibility. But I do not want to go down the road of setting a precedent that we're going to be spending $60,000 forever, and then they're going to need 12 crossing guards because it's, more kids are walking, and pretty soon it's real money. And for us to raise, I mean, it's a bigger penny, more of 1 cent for the city side to raise these dollars than it is for the state. And I believe there's probably state money that offsets some of the, like, transportation issues for schools, like the buses and stuff. That isn't, so I don't know about crossing guards. But Jesse, do you have anything to add? And then we'll listen to Carol, and then we'll get back to Kate.
So I think this is a really interesting conversation. I think it would be great to have a steering committee. I do also want to point out it's not related to the funding request, but it is related to our shared goal of kids and families getting to school safely. That Violet and her team have done a really great job in the last couple of months, kind of beefing up their Safe Routes to School efforts and assigning a staff person to work on that and connecting that staff person to the Bike Ped Committee. And I think a lot of the conversations the city has been having in the last decade or two around walkability and bikeability there's a huge Venn diagram to the same conversation of kids and families getting to school. And I think the more we can integrate those conversations at a policy level, as opposed to the, kind of the Band-Aid of the crossing guard, I think the better. So I don't want to lose sight of a lot of those policy conversations are starting to happen between staff and the committees already. And that's really to the superintendent's credit to identify that as a part of the long-term solution.
Okay, well, that may be a really excellent topic for our next steering committee, if we can figure out perhaps an interim step. But Carol McQuillan wanted to make a comment.
I think Helen had a good point, and I think Jesse's alluding to it. So as a teacher at Orchard for 20 years, we would have
Carol, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Turn the light on. Is it bright?
Thank you. That's it. So as a teacher at Orchard for 20 years, we would know that there are children living 1, 2, and 3 blocks away from school that are hopping on a bus, and there might be the cost savings between looking at the parameter of where kids could literally get to school by walking safely with guards in lieu of paying for that bus, and you might have a cost breakout that makes it safe and a good practice. So it's just a thought that many of us have had conversations that kids live very close to school and are getting buses. So maybe instead of the bus, you'd have money for guards. Just a thought.
Thank you. Okay, Kate, you wanted to make a comment? And then I'd like us to sort of figure out what we want to do tonight and then move on. And I think we clearly need to have a longer conversation. So Kate?
Yeah, I just want to respond to a couple of points. Hopefully, I'll capture everything. So this is a continual conversation that we've exchanged letters about since the spring and discussed at our steering committee meeting in July. And so I do see this as that we've had this conversation in the past. It's not that this conversation is coming out of nowhere, and that this ask specifically for traffic monitors is a direct response, particularly at Rick Marcotte, to the development that's happening in our city. Like Tyler mentioned, it's happening fast and it's happening right now. And so there's a real need to respond. I believe funding the traffic monitor, especially at Rick Marcotte, would be that interim step that we're talking about to relieve some of the pressure so that we could have a longer term conversation. We currently have a person who will staff the traffic monitor, and the hiring, my understanding is that it went through the district out of necessity because the position was hard to fill, but the district is absolutely open to this being a city staff member. I think it's easy enough to coordinate with the school calendar. It could be a city staff member, similar to the way we have our school resource officer, who is an employee of the city police, but she spends the majority of her time, my understanding, in the schools and with our students. So there are, I highlight that as another way that we could adapt this for the long term. The district is not eager to have sort of this accounting HR responsibility. It's fallen to us out of necessity as a reaction to real concerns around safety at the end of last year, or the end of last school year, through the summer into this year, which is a continuing conversation that we've had for several months now. So my ask, in short, understanding that maybe this is an ongoing conversation in collaboration with Climate Action Goals, Bike Ped, since we have the staff member, this staff who would like to be the traffic monitor for Rick Marcotte, if you could at least extend what you've approved in April and approve the staffing cost for the traffic monitor this school year through
So that would be
FY24.
10,000.
Well, we did 7 already, so $3,212.
It's different fiscal years, so I believe it's a different approval. But my point is that you've already approved this before, and so my ask is for you to approve again a Rick Marcotte crossing guard at the bare minimum.
Okay, well, I think we could potentially have a motion to approve the continuation of the crossing guard at Rick Marcotte. And you can let us know what that cost is, since there's some already in the budget expended, is that right?
No, it's not. So it's when we did not last year's money. Vote was to spend last year's money. When that was not spent, it has stayed in fund balance.
Oh, okay.
So you
So
need a
we would need
motion
to
for the
appropriate
10.
the
Yeah,
$10,212.20.
one position. Yes.
That's one person. Okay.
That's one position, yes.
Okay. Is that,
I would make that motion.
is
I'll
there a
second.
second?
I would second.
Where is this person stationed?
Right at the crossing on school, whatever, it's not School Street, we haven't named it right, right?
Lissa Lane.
Pardon?
The driveway from Marcotte and Market Street,
Yeah.
right at the library corner.
Crosses there.
That's where
Who crosses that?
All the kids who walk. They have to cross twice, because they can't go in that last.
So they don't have a crossing guard where we have a path that went from their apartments. We have a path.
I know, but there's kids who come from other places, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm okay. I'm certainly comfortable with the school determining where the best place is for the
Right.
crossing guard. I don't want to micromanage that.
Yeah.
I don't want to
No.
hire them. I don't want to
Just money.
have oversight for this next fiscal year. I'm willing to support covering the cost, and then we can have a longer conversation. Because Kate, when we did talk about this, it was one guard. We were never originally talking about it's going to be 6
Right.
at $61,000.
Right.
So fund balance or no fund balance, $61,000 is $61,000.
Right.
It's, it's not a rounding error. So we have a motion on the table. Barb, one last comment, and then I'd like to.
One last comment, sorry, that this basically, it deals with the issue of a crossing guard in your construction.
Yes.
And you might want to stipulate that in your motion. Just a thought.
Okay.
I'm worried about
It's a
precedent.
crossing guard that's related to construction. So for the duration of construction on Marketplace, we'll fund a crossing guard for Marcotte School at a cost of $10,212.20 per year, per school year.
For How long for this next year?
Well, I think for construction.
Until the construction's over.
So,
It would be for FY24, but I think the direction we have would be, we would add that into the draft FY25 budget, and you could then make the decision whether to have it remain in there or
Right.
take it out. But
that's
We
fine.
need an annual review.
yes.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. So we have a motion made and seconded. Is there further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. And we'll continue the conversation, Kate.
Thank you.
Item 8 is now other business. Is there any other business?
Just a quick comment.
We just did 9. That was the traffic monitors.
8.
I'm sorry, 9, excuse me. Yeah.
At the town fair, I attended a 40-minute presentation by a gentleman that runs an IT company that specializes in cybersecurity. I just wanted to point out that one of the social hacking methods that they will use is to distribute free flash drives, around an office building, or they might have they might have some sort of giveaway on iPhone charging
trust
cables.
anyone.
iPhone charging cables. And the iPhone charging cable, right? When you plug it in, it actually has a transmitter in it, right? And if they're nearby, they can pretty much read everything on your phone. It looks absolutely like the normal, Apple product. But inside of it, it's got, the ingredients to be able to sniff out everything.
Okay.
And the USB, similar problem, but also they could be loaded with a virus or something.
No
So-
free gifts, except
so
no
the-
free gifts.
The moral of the story is,
This shirt.
the moral of the story is do not plug anything into your computer that you did not buy yourself from a trusted and responsible proprietor. Right, and second of all, lock your bikes with a kryptonite or otherwise
Our
U-bolt,
public
and
safety
lock
guy
your cars and don't leave your valuables in them. Those are the 3 main security recommendations by Tim Barrett. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim. All right, so there's no other business, so I would like us to consider entering into executive session. And Tim, you have the motions?
I do have the motion, and so just to hold on a second, I might bring this up. So there are 4 topics tonight for the motion, and I'm going to go through each one. So I move that the council make a specific finding that premature general public knowledge of the council's discussion of 1, contracts and negotiating or securing of real estate purchase or lease options, and 2, again, contracts and negotiating or securing of real estate purchase or lease options, 3, pending civil litigation to which the city is a party, and 4, labor relations agreements with the employees, which would clearly place this public body at a substantial disadvantage.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So I now move the city council enter into executive session under 1 VSA 313A1A, B, and E, and 1 VSA 313A2 for the purpose of discussing 1, contracts and negotiating or securing of real estate purchase or lease options, 2, the exact same words I just spoke, 3, pending civil litigation to which the city is a party, and 4, labor relations agreements with employees. Now, I'd like to invite into the city council for the executive session Jesse Baker, Steve Locke, Paul Connor, Colin McNeil, and Tom and Janet Bellavance for item 1. Jesse Baker, Steve Locke, Paul Connor, Colin McNeil, Robin Jeffers, Carol McQuillan into session 2 with the council, and also then Jesse Baker, Steve Locke, and Colin McNeil for items 3 and 4.
Okay, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And we will not be coming back with any votes, so we will adjourn.
All right.
And we're going to room 301 on the 3rd floor.
Fabulous.
Okay.